The criminal justice system has handed down countless sentences stretching across decades, yet not every case warrants a lifetime in prison. Certain people have spent most of their years locked up, either for grave offenses or because of mistaken convictions. The tales that follow peel back the brutal truth of life behind bars while sparking tough questions about fairness, redemption, and the rocky road back to society. We'll dive into the lives of prisoners who've clocked decades in cells and trace their paths to freedom, or lack thereof. What's your stance on their outcomes? Did some deserve an earlier shot at release? Or were there those who should have stayed caged forever? Smash that like button and follow along so you don't miss out on more jaw-dropping stories. Pass this post to your crew and kick off a debate about the longest prison stretches ever recorded. Joe Ligon's journey kicked off in a rough patch. Hailing from Alabama, he faced a tough upbringing before his family uprooted to Philadelphia when he was 13. At only 15, Ligon got tangled up in a brutal crime with 4 other teens, leaving 2 people dead. He owned up to joining in the stabbings that night, but swore he didn't deliver the fatal blows. Even so, the court pinned him with first-degree murder and locked him away for life, with no chance of parole ever on the table. Ligon's trial was a whirlwind, wrapped up in just one day, barely pausing to weigh his youth or the shaky ground of his defense. Back then, the system didn't flinch at treating kids like grown-ups in court, showing scant regard for how teenage brains work, or the possibility that someone so young could turn their life around. Ligon's situation wasn't a one-off. Across the U.S., more and more teens were being handed life sentences with no hope of parole. Even at his tender age, he got slammed with a no-exit life term, turning his case into a rallying cry for those fighting to overhaul how the system handles young offenders. Decades into his sentence, Ligon got a shot at clemency in the 1970s, but he turned it down flat because it came with parole strings attached. That choice marked a turning point in his battle for justice. He'd rather hold on to his pride than bend to conditions he saw as a slap in the face to his sense of right and wrong. In 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court dropped a bombshell, declaring life without parole for juveniles unconstitutional, which threw Ligon's case back into the spotlight for review. This landmark ruling shook up the juvenile justice world, spotlighting the potential for young offenders to grow and redeem themselves. It drove home the point that locking kids away forever ignores their ability to transform over time. In 2017, after 64 years behind bars, Ligon finally walked free on parole, earning the title of the longest-serving juvenile lifer in U.S. history. His story ignited fierce discussions about justice, youth, and whether kids can truly turn their lives around. Inside, Ligon didn't just sit still. He dove into education, tackled therapy, and pushed himself to grow. His journey became a beacon for the push to rethink how we sentence young offenders. His release also rode a wave of rising public outrage over how tough penalties unfairly hammer minority and struggling communities. As a black man, Ligon's ordeal shines a harsh light on the deep racial disparities baked into the criminal justice system. His release kicked off talks about restorative justice, stressing the need to dig into the context behind crimes kids commit, especially when systemic unfairness and scarce opportunities are in play. Ligon's path stands as a stark reminder of the system's shortcomings and its capacity for reform. His tale proves the grit of the human soul and the chance for redemption, even after decades locked away. I got the chance to sit down with Aaron Glenn, a guy who once carried the heavy label of America's longest-serving death row inmate. His story started on a doomed day in Shreveport, Louisiana in 1984. Glenn was nailed for the murder of Isidore Roseman, a jeweler gunned down in his own shop. Working as a gardener at Roseman's place, Aaron was in the wrong spot at the wrong time, nabbed quick on a shaky pile of circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's case was flimsy, but Glenn still got slapped with a death sentence, even with scant hard proof and the state burying key details. His ordeal turned into a glaring poster child for wrongful convictions in Louisiana, a place infamous for its flood of death penalty cases and stark racial gaps in justice. Glenn's trial was a mess, riddled with screw-ups like inexperienced court-appointed lawyers who fumbled his defense big time. An all-white jury found Glenn guilty and handed him a death sentence. His defense was crippled by lawyers who barely prepped, skipping a deep dive into the evidence or building a solid case to fight for him. Slip-ups like these weren't rare in death penalty trials for minority defendants. Glenn's story also laid bare the deep-seated racial bias that's long swayed sentencing, especially down in the American South. In the 2000s, Glenn's legal crew uncovered that vital evidence had been stashed away. By 2013, word broke that Jake Robinson, another guy in the mix, had owned up to the killing. Robinson was on the radar from day one, but never got a proper look from investigators. Glenn's lawyers dug up that prosecutors had buried critical evidence, like Robinson's confession, that could have cleared him, stuff the cops brushed off back during the trial. After almost 30 years staring down death row, Glenn's conviction got tossed out in 2014. His release was a bittersweet mix of tragedy and victory, marking the end of a wrongful nightmare and adding him to the long list of lives mangled by a broken justice system. Once free, Glenn stepped up as a fierce voice for overhauling criminal justice and shining a light on the cracks in the legal machine. Sadly, Glenn barely got a taste of his hard-won freedom. He died of lung cancer in 2015, mere months after walking out, having weathered 3 decades on death row for a crime he never committed. His story turned into a pivotal chapter in the debate over wrongful convictions, laying bare the devastating fallout from the justice system's missteps. Glenn's ordeal lit a fire under efforts to shake up Louisiana's justice system, especially around the death penalty and how evidence gets handled. His wrongful conviction stands as a chilling wake-up call about the system's screw-ups, hitting hardest for those without the cash for a solid defense or stuck facing deep-rooted bias. Though his passing was a gut punch, it hammered home the pressing need for change to stop others from ending up in the same boat. Born in 1924, Francis Smith's world flipped upside down when he was convicted in 1950 for a murder he might not have carried out. It all went down in 1949 when Grover Hart, a night watchman, was killed at the Indian Harbor Yacht Club in Greenwich, Connecticut. Smith, a small-time crook back then, got slapped with a life sentence for supposedly being part of the crime, even though he swore he was innocent. The case pinning Smith was shaky, with key pieces about his role staying murky. Legal buffs and onlookers started questioning his guilt, plenty convinced he'd been locked up unjustly. Smith's trek through the justice system was a tangled, drawn-out mess. In 1967, he bolted from a prison farm, dodging a massive manhunt for 12 days before getting nabbed again. After that, he bounced between lockups, including the Osborne Correctional Institution. Smith walked free in September 2020 after nearly 70 years locked up, a stretch that ate up most of his life. His marathon behind bars sparked doubts about whether his trial was fair and if his sentence was overkill, especially as views on his guilt shifted over time. Years back, he'd been offered clemency but wasn't quick to bite. In the end, though, he signed off on a deal and landed in a spot for older parolees. Since walking free, Smith hasn't stepped out of line once, hinting that his decades in the clink might have shifted his perspective. His situation feeds into a wider convo about aging prisoners, a rising concern as more people stretch long sentences into their later years. Legal minds and even folks linked to Smith's case have voiced unease over how his trial and sentencing played out, with some insisting he never should have been found guilty to begin with. The grim event that landed Francis Smith in hot water still stirs up debate. In 1949, Grover Hart, a 68-year-old security guard, was killed at the Indian Harbor Yacht Club in a brutal attack by two gunmen wielding two weapons. One of them, George Loudon, copped a plea and pointed the finger at Smith as the other shooter, sealing Smith's fate with a conviction. But as time rolled on, new twists in the case started telling a different story. After serving his time, Loudon fessed up that the cops had strong-armed him into blaming Smith. On top of that, a crucial witness who'd helped nail Smith took back their story, piling on more uncertainty about his guilt. Then there was David Blumetti, a guy doing time in Alabama who stepped up and claimed he was the real second shooter. All this threw a massive wrench into the legitimacy of Smith's conviction and the life sentence he got stuck with. Zachary Fry, a data whiz hooked on digging into old cases, took a hard look at Smith's situation and found solid clues pointing to him not being the killer. Fry's convinced it's a textbook screw-up of justice, with Smith getting railroaded by shaky evidence and dodgy witnesses. He says the botched conviction and the brushed-off appeals in the 1960s laid bare some ugly cracks in the system. The messy handling of Smith's case screams that his guilty verdict never should have held up. In 1954, Smith came within hours of the execution chamber, a nail-biting close call that defined his saga. A last-second stay snatched him from death's door, swapping his fate for a lengthy prison stretch. A game-changer, though it couldn't undo the wreckage already piled up. If he'd been executed or left to rot for life, his wrongful conviction might have slipped under the radar, justice left in the dust. What's your take on these tales? Did justice win out, or are there still wrongs crying for a fix? Jump into the convo. Drop your thoughts below. Hit like and share if this got your gears turning. Stick with us for more gripping cases. You might be familiar with the concept of long-serving prisoners, but have you ever come across someone who holds a Guinness World Record? Let me introduce you to Paul Guel Jr., a man whose time behind bars became nothing short of legendary. Born on May 1, 1894, in Hartford, Connecticut, Paul's life was marked by hardship. His father, an alcoholic and saloon proprietor, died when Paul was only 5. This loss left Paul with a fragmented childhood, as he spent much of his early years shuttling between Hartford and New York City, often staying in hotels. At 17, Paul found himself on a troubled path, turning to robbery. During one incident, he tragically took the life of 73-year-old wealthy broker William H. Jackson at the Iroy Hotel in New York. Using a chloroform-soaked cloth, Paul caused Jackson's death, but in the end, only a small amount of money was stolen. Arrested 2 days later, Paul was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Paul started his sentence at the notorious Sing Sing prison, where his improved behavior over time earned him a reduced sentence. However, in 1926, doctors diagnosed him as insane, leading to his transfer to the Dannemora State Hospital for the criminally insane. Paul spent many years in different institutions, but it wasn't until 1972 that he was moved to the Fishkill Correctional Facility, a facility for older inmates. There, Paul settled into a more comfortable routine and even forged strong bonds with the staff, who occasionally took him to events like baseball games. After serving 63 years, Paul was granted parole in 1980 at the age of 86. However, in a surprising turn, he chose not to leave prison. Having spent the majority of his adult life behind bars and losing contact with his family, he felt disconnected from the outside world and decided to remain for another 6 years. It wasn't until 1986, at the age of 92, that Paul finally left Fishkill, after serving one of the longest prison sentences in U.S. history. He spent his final years in Beacon, New York, and passed away at the age of 93. Paul's life stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and his story remains one of the most remarkable in criminal history. Meet Thomas Jones, who was arrested in 1944 as a young boy and sentenced to a severe punishment that matched the gravity of his crime. A tragic example of a child committing an unspeakable act, Thomas mercilessly took the lives of all his classmates with a hunting knife. However, in 2025, after serving an astonishing 80 years in prison, he was finally released, marking an extraordinary chapter in the history of criminal justice. When he was arrested, Batman was only 5 years old, and Stanley Kubrick had directed just one film. Just imagine how long ago that was. The fact that he endured through all that time is truly extraordinary and unprecedented. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below and feel free to share. Have you ever heard the story of Johnson Griggsby? He's the man behind Johnny Cash's song Michigan City, but his life story is much more than just that. Griggsby was born in either February 1886 or 1888, though he never quite knew the exact year. He was born into a family with roots in freed slaves. In 1900, Griggsby and his family made a significant move from Shelby County, Kentucky, to Cuckoo, Indiana. This move was part of the broader Great Migration, when African Americans from the South sought better economic opportunities and an escape from racial violence by relocating to northern cities. Griggsby's life took a tragic turn in 1908, when he was 20 years old and involved in a fatal incident with a man named James Brown during a poker game at a bar in Anderson, Illinois. The altercation began with an exchange of harsh words, which escalated when Brown became physically confrontational. In response, Griggsby briefly left to retrieve a knife for self-defense. Upon his return, the confrontation continued, resulting in Brown's death. To avoid a more severe punishment, Griggsby pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to prison, receiving inmate number 4045. Griggsby's case garnered local attention and highlighted the racial tensions of the time, particularly the strained relations between black and white communities. He spent 66 years in prison, nearly 50 of which were spent in a mental hospital. Throughout his lengthy incarceration, Griggsby struggled with significant mental health issues, a situation not uncommon for prisoners in the early 20th century, especially those enduring harsh conditions. Despite his troubled past, Griggsby eventually became a model prisoner. During his time behind bars, he dedicated himself to learning, spending his days reading the Bible, a dictionary, and an encyclopedia. These books helped expand his knowledge and sparked his curiosity. He also developed a passion for writing, composing poetry and letters in which he expressed his desire for redemption. Despite his humble beginnings and violent youth, Griggsby's writings revealed a deep sense of self-reflection and personal growth. Griggsby applied for parole 33 times before finally being granted release in December 1974 at the age of 86 after spending the majority of his life behind bars. However, adjusting to life outside of prison proved to be a challenging task. After decades of incarceration, Griggsby was overwhelmed by the rapid changes in the world around him. Everything from new technology and evolving social norms to the fast-paced nature of modern life. His story serves as a powerful reminder of the challenges faced during reintegration, especially for those who have been incarcerated for such extended periods. At the age of 90, Griggsby voluntarily returned to prison for 17 months before being released once more. This time, at 91, he was fully free and found peace in a nursing home in Marion County, where he could live out his remaining years in comfort and stability, following a structured routine. Life in the nursing home provided Griggsby with a stable environment, a sense of security and routine that he had never known for most of his life. In his final years, he found peace, surrounded by people who understood the challenges of old age and valued the importance of stability. For the first time, Griggsby was able to experience a sense of calm and contentment, marking a quiet and peaceful end to a life full of hardship and struggle. Griggsby's story serves as a poignant reminder of how prolonged incarceration can profoundly affect a person's life and their reintegration into society. His journey sheds light on the flaws in the current prison system and emphasizes the urgent need for stronger support networks for those re-entering society after serving time. Having spent the majority of his life behind bars, Griggsby's tale is one of self-discovery, remorse, and the pursuit of atonement. In the end, his story is a powerful testament to the unwavering strength of the human spirit when confronted with immense adversity. Richard Hanik's story is another example that challenges the conventional understanding of a typical prison sentence. Born on January 5, 1879, into a privileged family involved in agricultural equipment, Richard's life took a tragic twist when, at just 20 years old, he was arrested for the murder of Walter F. Kerr in September 1899. Hanik, together with his accomplice Hermann Hundhausen, unlawfully entered Kerr's room armed with an array of weapons, including knives and guns, with the intent to rob him. Kerr, who had previously testified against them in other cases, was discovered dead, having suffered multiple stab wounds. Following the murder, Hanik was sentenced to life in prison. He began his sentence at Joliet Prison, where in 1912 he stabbed a prison assistant, resulting in his placement in solitary confinement and being chained for several months. Eventually, he was transferred to Southern Illinois Prison, where he spent the next 35 years working in the prison bakery. After spending more than 60 years in prison, Hanik was granted release on December 20, 1963, due to the determined efforts of his granddaughter, Clara Orr. Following his release, he settled in Sutherland, Oregon, where he spent the rest of his life. In 1971, at the age of 92, Hanik was moved to a nursing home in Roseburg, where he lived until his passing in December 1976 at the age of 97. Hanik's lengthy imprisonment and his eventual release in his later years highlight how time can transform a person, while also shedding light on the significant challenges faced by those attempting to reintegrate into society after spending decades behind bars. John Franz Sr. was a prominent figure in organized crime with a career that spanned more than 80 years. His involvement with the infamous Colombo crime family began in the 1930s, and by 1963, he had risen to the position of underboss. His criminal activities were wide-ranging, including masterminding a string of bank robberies throughout the United States. However, his criminal empire came to a halt in 1967 when he was arrested and sentenced to 50 years in prison. While it initially appeared he would serve a lengthy sentence, Franz Sr. was granted parole in 1978. Yet, his behavior remained unchanged, and he repeatedly violated parole, leading to at least 6 subsequent incarcerations. In 2004, he was arrested once more, but by 2005, he had been reinstated as the underboss of the Colombo family under Tomas Jelly. However, by 2007, he was back in prison for yet another parole violation. Even while serving his sentence in 2008, John Franzese Sr. continued to face fresh charges. He was accused of involvement in murders during the violent gang wars between the Colombo families in the early 1990s, as well as being linked to other criminal activities, including fur coat thefts in New York and a home burglary in Los Angeles. These allegations led to a range of charges against Franzese, including extortion, robbery, drug trafficking, and other criminal activities. However, despite the serious accusations, Franzese was able to retain his position as underboss within the Colombo family, largely due to a lack of solid evidence. Ultimately, it was his own son, John Franzese Jr., who played a pivotal role in his downfall. In 2005, Franzese Jr. secretly wore a recording device and gathered incriminating conversations from his father. These recordings proved critical in securing an additional 8-year prison sentence for Franzese Sr. on charges of extortion and other crimes. Despite his rapidly declining health, Franzese Sr. was denied compassionate release in 2016. However, in June 2017, at the age of 103, he was released, making him the oldest federal prisoner in U.S. history at that time. Unfortunately, Franzese passed away in February 2020. His tumultuous life left a profound legacy, influencing both his family and the world of organized crime. Joseph Sledge's life took a tragic turn on September 6, 1976. When 2 women were brutally murdered in Elizabethtown, North Carolina. Both victims had been stabbed multiple times and showed signs of a violent struggle. The police investigation quickly zeroed in on Joseph, who had recently escaped from a minimum security prison and was considered a suspect due to his criminal history. He was arrested and charged after a series of confessions made while in prison. Yet Joseph consistently maintained his innocence throughout the process. In 1978, Joseph was put on trial for the murders. Despite strongly denying any involvement, the jury convicted him, sentencing him to 2 consecutive life terms. Joseph appealed his conviction to the North Carolina Supreme Court, but all attempts to overturn the verdict were unsuccessful. Over the next few decades, he filed more than 25 post-conviction appeals, arguing that there had been errors in the original trial and claiming that one of the key witnesses, Herman Baker, had lied under duress. However, these efforts proved futile, and his conviction remained intact. The turning point came in 2012, when evidence that had been believed to be lost was finally found. DNA testing on a pubic hair sample collected from the crime scene revealed that it did not match Joseph. This breakthrough prompted a renewed investigation, and in 2013, Herman Baker, the key witness, recanted his testimony. He admitted that he had been coerced into falsely accusing Joseph, further bolstering his claims of innocence. The investigation continued to reveal more disturbing revelations, including the fact that prosecutors had intentionally withheld critical evidence that could have exonerated Joseph during his original trial. In January 2015, a panel of judges from the North Carolina Supreme Court declared Joseph completely innocent. After more than 36 years of wrongful imprisonment, he was finally released, making him the longest-serving wrongfully convicted prisoner in North Carolina to be exonerated through DNA evidence. After his release, Joseph was compensated $750,000 for the years he spent wrongfully imprisoned. However, despite this legal victory, his case remains a stark reminder of the flaws within the justice system. Some individuals, including the granddaughter of one of the victims, still refuse to believe in his innocence. This ongoing denial underscores the deep gaps in the justice system, highlighting how some continue to question the truth even in the face of undeniable evidence. These stories not only highlight the cruelty of the justice system, but also emphasize the strength of the human spirit in the face of decades-long sentences. Serving time behind bars doesn't simply end when the gates open. It signifies the start of a new struggle, reintegrating into society, confronting past mistakes, and fighting for a second chance. So, what's your take? Which of these individuals truly deserves the chance to rebuild their life? We'd love to hear your thoughts.